Now thy earthly task is done, home art gone, and ta'en thy wages. Golden lads and girls all must resign to this and come to dust. I mean, a lot of lines like that, and there was one particular verse by a poet who I like very much, love very much, a poet called Theodor Roitger. There's a poem that Ken, we didn't always talk about poems, but sometimes, and I remember once saying this poem, this is little 4 lines from a poem which was a favourite of his. It's called In a Dark, just the 4 lines, In a Dark Time, and they seem today to be more applicable than ever. In a dark time, the eye begins to see. I meet my shadow in the deepening shade. I hear my echo in the echoing wood. A lord of nature weeping to a tree. And I wanted to mention those lines, and also to say it's just obviously not just lines of poetry that come to mind, but a lot of very, very vivid images. Now is not the time to get into anecdote and recollection, except just a couple of very quick ones. And one is just, I just was thinking about it going past this house up the Harakiri Valley a couple of days ago. The house was on a farm that Ken was owning or leasing or something. Anyway, he and I were painting the roof one day, and we were up on the roof, and like all good roof painters, we started from the middle of the roof, so you work out. Anyway, it was a fine afternoon, and we were gossiping away. Didn't notice the rain clouds, and of course the rain came down, and sort of, was any downpipe that ever got painted on the inside as this paint, and still to this day there's a sort of rainbow colour pattern on that roof, so just thinking about that. And another little, not a little thing, a very big and very strong image of my friend Man was when he launched a book for me in 1987 in Parramatta, the Parramatta Boating Club. And I remember when he was standing speaking, it wasn't just what he was saying, which in itself was funny and irreverent and great. But he was standing there with the Kakaho hills and skyline behind, and I remember some lines came to me at the time, something about, I saw a man stand in front of a mountain do its thing behind the man, and such was the greatness of the man, and such the understanding nature of the mountain. They looked so good together, they could belong to each other. And I just would like to sort of take the chance to say goodbye publicly and just finish before passing to someone else with a little poem that I wrote, I think recently. Yeah, I think so. Well, I haven't written it, but I can hear it. And it's just a little poem which I like to say and dedicate to Ken. It's called Old Flames. The cabbage tree was, they said, dead. There was nothing there or anyone could do, now or any day, how sorry they were and sad. But the cabbage tree heard them. No one noticed it shaking its head. It shook it so hard, stars were said to have spread from where the cabbage tree stood, a blossoming new constellation across the night sky south. Someone said just yesterday, some fires you can't put out. Thank you very much. See you, old friend. Thank you very much.
And since then I've learnt and experienced the famous grey hospitality on many occasions. It's something I'm told that goes back to the old days, the days round Granny Grey's kitchen, when people used to gather around the kitchen table, often amongst the cake tins and the mail for the week and even a saddle or two, to sit around and to talk, to laugh and to argue. Ken was a person who used to love to entertain, and he made you feel so welcome. He loved nothing more than a glass of wine, some food and some good political conversation. And he used to like to do it around that breakfast bar in their home in Greys Road. And I think that breakfast bar became an extension of the old kitchen table. It was only 8 weeks ago, many of us gathered at Ken and Joy's home to celebrate his victory in winning the nomination for the Western Hutt seat. We gathered around that breakfast bar once more, and into the small hours we argued and talked, with Ken leading the charge about how we should fix the world. Old friends have told me over the last few days some really interesting stories about Ken, and they've asked me if I'd pass them on to you. Ken, I gather, developed an extrasensory perception, which enabled him to be able to sniff out home baking from kilometres away. In fact, he had this ability to track down cake tins and empty them while he was visiting people. And his hosts were delighted because they had partaken of his generosity and his hospitality on many occasions. Like many people, I first heard of Ken back in the 1960s, Ken Gray, the All Black. That was back in the days when All Blacks were heroes and winners, and Ken was both. Robert Newcombe, an old friend of Ken, one of his oldest friends who went to school with him, told me that Ken started his rugby career as a halfback. Well, I found that hard to believe when I looked at him. He was such a giant of a man, not only in his size, but in many other ways. Robert said that he was good at all sport at school. He loved sailing, he loved speedboat racing, he loved anything to do with the sea, and he loved horse riding. But the Ken that I know best is Ken Gray, the political activist. Ken loved politics, local, national, international. And although his political colours were Labour, he mixed and made friends with people from all political persuasions. Traditional political enemies couldn't dislike Ken. They might have disagreed with what he said, but he was admired and accepted for his talents, his courage, his convictions, his principles, and his ability to be able to argue a political point and then walk away as a friend. Ken was an asset to the Labour Party. He brought a credibility to the party with him, particularly in the area of farming. And he was prepared to stand up for Labour Party policies before they became fashionable or trendy. His political career started right at the bottom where the hard work is done in local government. And those people who worked with him have told me about his straight talking and about his determination to get things done. Ken made a considerable input into Labour Party policy through his involvement in the Primary Producers Council. He was one of the people who helped change attitudes and to formulate practical policies for farming within the Labour Party. But his real love was economic policies. And in the last difficult years of the last Labour government, Ken chaired the Economic Consultative Committee of the party. And of course he received flack from everybody. But he didn't give up or resign. He stayed there, better than the Tom Scott cartoon in the Evening Post on Thursday night, which said, Ken Gray, All Black, farmer, citizen, bloody good bloke.
Another week of humour with Ken was beginning, but he wasn't joking about those matches. With the lights in operation, we drove south in midwinter while the temperature dropped. Looking down, we noticed the road could be viewed beneath our legs. The heater didn't stand a chance. Even Ken's in-depth conversation on the state of the universe did not warm us up. Two of us slept while the third drove. When Ashburton was finally reached, Ken had the flu for the 3 following days, I had mild hypothermia, and Howard has kept the BMWs ever since.
It's so hard to say goodbye to yesterday.
In the church today, I'm sure there are many who can relate to that kind of sentiment, and it certainly seems only a few short years before yesterday that Ken joined the All Blacks assembling in Auckland for the 1963-4 UK tour. He had burst onto the rugby scene over the previous 2 years and was an automatic selection. Those days, I remind you, we did the long tours of 32, 3 or 4 games, and were away for well over 4 months. Ken and I roomed together at the start of the tour. He hadn't long been married, as I recall, and this was his first tour away. He quickly found his feet and adjusted to the higher demands of touring, but there was occasional difficulties. I recall early in the tour, it must have been Ken's second or third match only. We were playing Swansea or Llanelli or someone, and the player marking Ken in the line out had been suspended from club rugby for fighting or some sort of illegalities, but he'd been released for this one game. And he was marking Ken. And he elbowed and leant and pushed and thumped and became totally a nuisance, that after 20 minutes, Ken, in the line-out in front of the main stand, which was packed with people, looked back into the line-out, and we all stood shoulder to shoulder in those days, and he looked back towards me and said, "I know what I'd do to this fellow here if I was playing for Petone or Wellington, but I don't want to do the wrong thing in an All Black jersey. Advise me." Well, unfortunately for the Welshman, standing between Ken and I, because I was at 4 and Ken was 2, was Mr. Meads, who gave the advice before I could. And Mr. Meads said, "Thump him." The fellow could have said, "Don't thump him," really, he was only standing there. So the ball came in, whack, and this fellow's lying in the mud. And I said, "I'll have to have a chat with you after the game about subtlety and timing," because the referee had penalised us and the crowd were getting restless. And Ken and Pinetree said, "Yes," he said, "he needs some honing up on subtlety, but his technique's not bad."
Dad was our rudder, the centre of our life, and greatly influenced the course of our lives. To our darling mum Joy, he was a best friend and intellectual suitor. He offered loving commitment without reservation and openly displayed his devotion to Joy. In fact, many of my brothers and my friends who came to know Joy and Ken would comment on their open affection towards one another.